Hola, buenos días. Bueno, bienvenidos al espacio estelar que tenemos para el FLI. Es el segundo que tenemos en el evento. La charla se va a llevar a cabo en inglés, pero va a haber, se va a poder hacer interpretación. Van a haber intérpretes que ustedes los pueden encontrar abajo donde hay un mundito que dice Interpretation, ahí por si quieren escucharlo en español. Y bueno, le cedo la palabra directamente a Paula Cardenó, que es quien va a moderar esta conversación sobre orígenes y futuros de Impact Investment. Y los otros dos keynote speakers son Kieran Boyle y Maximilian Martin, con los tres yo trabajé muchísimo, así que la verdad que es un honor tenerlos a los tres en el Free y en nuestro primer Free digital. Así que bueno, bienvenidos y que sea un diálogo excelente. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you, Agus, for your warm introduction. I'm also really happy and looking forward for this hour ahead that we are going to have with Kieran and Max, who are not only experts, but practitioners in impact investment. And so I would like to start like introducing them because they are impressive what they have done. Max Martin serves as Senior Fellow at the Elias Center for Social Innovation at MD Business School. He's one of Europe's impact pioneers. He created Europe's first university course on social entrepreneurship in 2003, Europe's first philanthropic services and impact investing offering at a bank, UBS. I must say that I had the privilege of working with him at that stage. He coined the impact economy and corporate impact venturing and founded Impact Economy in 2011. He also wrote the UK Cabinet Office Prime Status of the Social Impact Investing Market for the first G8 conference on impact investing in 2013. And in his role as Lombard Odiers Global Head of Philanthropy, he leads the international committees of the Red Cross's program for humanitarian impact investment transaction, humanitarian impact bond, on the side of the co-sponsor Lombard Odier, launched in 2017. Max holds an MA from Indiana, an MPA from Harvard, and a PhD from Hamburg. His book, Building the Impact Economy, Our Future, Yeah or Nay, develops a comprehensive framework for creating sustainable new businesses approaches. So great, Max, to have you here. Kieran Boyle is the Chief Executive of Guy's and St. Thomas Foundation, one of the world's oldest health foundations. Kieran previously led the UK government's work on impact investment. In his role, he formed the G8 Task Force on Social Impact Investment and led initiatives creating the Access Foundation, Government Outcomes Lab, and Dementia Discovery Fund. Prior to this, he worked at number 10 Downing Street, the Department for Business, the Foreign Office, and the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit. He started his career in the Boston Consulting Group. Kieran also sits on the boards of Big Society Capital, the Design Council, and Catch-22. He chairs LIPH, a global coalition of institutional investors working to improve people's health, as well as Nesta's Cultural Impact Development Fund. He's a member of the Mayor of London's Childhood Obesity Task Force and on the advisory councils of the Impact Investment Institute and the Investment Integration Project. So let's talk about impact investment and let's share insights and let's enrich our conversation. I would like to ask as a first question, probably to Max, why do you think the impact investment emerged and how, despite it is a very not a larger portion of the investment market, it has got traction let's speak a bit about the initials or the fundamentals of impact investment. Yes.
Max, I think you're on mute. Max, we can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Fantastic. No, because I know Paula very well, and by the way, it's a pleasure to be here. And I know that balancing the creativity and control is important for Paula, but I was muted, and the host doesn't allow you to unmute yourself. So, anyways, but it's a pleasure to be here.
Sorry.
Before we start, me gustaría dar un gran saludo a los amigos latino-americanos que están aqui e também para os que falam português. Não sei se há alguém também em linha. É fantástico estar aqui na Europa e estar conectado com a América Latina. E agora vamos continuar em inglês. So let's continue in English. Yes, so, interestingly enough, I think when we think about the origins of impact investing, I mean, the fundamental idea that, when you want to allocate capital, when you want to invest, you should also look at extra financial indicators, issues. That isn't really that new per se, throughout history, there have always been people who've been doing business in a responsible manner. But I think what we've been seeing basically, essentially, I would say since the late 1970s in general, is a tendency on the one hand for the non-profit sector to professionalize. For example, until the 1970s, the CEO of the American Red Cross was a volunteer. Today, that would be unthinkable. And of course, we're here connected digitally. We're part of the data revolution. And, all of a sudden we have a lot more information. We have data at lower cost. And this really enabled, stating an impact hypothesis, what you want to achieve and how you want to measure it outside of pure financial indicators. And I think this is really what enabled, in a sense, the emergence of impact investing. Then I think it's also, frankly, human ingenuity, because, since we have this Latin American connection here, when you think about Rio 1992, of course, for the first time we really started collectively to think about in a sense, the limits, the planetary limits and boundaries in the global community. And on the one hand, the movement of sustainable investing was born. So looking at, how we can invest in big corporates, basically, while not doing any harm. But, and I think you all are part of this today, but there are always people who are more ambitious, who are thinking, well, can't we be more thoughtful about this? And in the early 2000s, essentially, the idea of impact investing, even though the term really hadn't been coined yet, was in the air. A lot of people were thinking about this at the same time. And we're thinking, well, if we wanted to really rethink finance in a fundamental way so that capital goes to those who need it, that we achieve to improve the state of the world, but also do this in a professional manner, then
you are mute, Max.
Yes, I know if I'm being too long, you tell me. So
no.
So,
nothing to do. I'm not responsible of that.
Okay, good. So essentially, this idea was up in the air. It was coming for a long time, and I think we got lucky in the, basically in 2006, 2007 or so, that an American foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, decided to actually host a conference around this. I mean, they had done things like that before. For example, the idea of creating, product development partnerships, for example, to find an AIDS drug. Those were all ideas that came out of conferences at the end of the day. So they convened a couple of people, 40, 50 people, in a beautiful estate in Bellagio in Italy. And there really, the idea was born to say, yes, we've heard about sustainable investing, about responsible investing. A long time ago, there were the Quakers. None of this is new. But if you want to really transform finance, probably need a new idea. We need a new narrative. And that's why we need a new terminology. And this is really the moment, the starting moment of impact investing as a movement as we know it today. And I know, it sounds odd because this wasn't such a long time ago,
no.
but at the time, the discussion in financial circles was completely different. People would sort of laugh you out the room if you said, but wait a second, shouldn't we not just return, maximize profit? Shouldn't we think about, for example, the base of the pyramid was a concept that existed already, thinking how we can bring the benefits of innovation markets to those who have a high collective purchasing power parity, but not a high individual purchasing power. So it was up in the air, and then a lot of things happened in a short amount of time. We can walk through that, but since we're interactive, I'll stop here and simply tell you it's an incredibly exciting journey. I remember, when I was fortunate to be part of this Bellagio conference. When we were there, people were saying, for example, the person who started the B Corp movement presented his idea there essentially, and now B Corps is an established idea, and there are many other such such concepts that were really, I wouldn't say the ideas were born there, but they came together and got a level of type of momentum that ultimately made them unstoppable. And of course, Kieran has played a very important role in this in the UK and elsewhere. But I'll stop here and let Kieran maybe comment as well.
Yes.
Just one message. Can you guys speak a bit slower so the interpreter can catch the messages a bit better? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Will do. I always get so enthusiastic. That is my problem.
I know.
Kieran, what would you like to add to that, to Mark's comments?
That's a wonderful overview, Mats. It really is, and likewise, it's a real pleasure to be with everybody. This afternoon in the UK, but whatever time it is around the world for everybody joining. Perhaps what I can add to Mats's comments, which I think very much come from the perspective of the investment market, the businesses that needed that capital, was the perspective of around a similar point that government started becoming much more engaged in this space, which in itself was interesting because I think some of the early stages of impact investing were asking questions around, actually, are we a response to the absence of government? i.e., is impact investment an important initiative because we're seeing the limitations of governments, perhaps the failures of governments to really deal with the social and environmental challenges that are ever more facing the world. And from a government perspective, I think there were three different things at play here. So one, as Matt said, was there clearly was the emergence of what I would call aligned capital. It was capital, all capital has an impact in the world. It can be a positive one, it can be a negative one, but there was more and more capital being thoughtful about that question, and also seeing that it was valuable to be thoughtful about that question. It created value, social value, environmental value, but in some circumstances also commercial value as well. The second thing that governments were seeing was a quite rapid rise in social entrepreneurship, a quite rapid rise in businesses that were seeking to differentiate themselves through purpose as well, be that in their form, what they do, the customers they serve, the employees they are trying to attract. But I think perhaps what was most distinct in a number of countries was also at this point, a lot of governments around the world were seeing the failures of the limitations of a new public management approach to the state. So a version of the state that thought you could run the state entirely on commercial terms, that essentially the model was to create markets, and competition, as in markets elsewhere, would drive up outcomes. And what was becoming very clear was that works in some areas, doesn't often work perfectly in areas that really matter as well. So governments were looking at ways of getting into what I would call aligned procurement. So they were looking to buy services, they were looking to buy outcomes as well that had public benefit at heart. And I think it was an important point of growth of the impact investment field that government started to get involved, not least because it started getting into the space of what things can governments do to accelerate markets from a regulatory perspective, from a market building perspective, and perhaps we can touch upon some of that
Definitely.
In a while. But that was the other thing that around the time that Matt started to close out on.
Great.
Started to emerge.
Yeah. And I just want to add, because I was there, at that time I was in Latin America, in Argentina, trying to also build something similar to impact investment. And I get that. I was going to traditional investors and speaking about impact, and they were like, what? Almost laughing, as Max said. And now I'm so happy that we have gone such a long way, and we are in this meeting sharing and speaking very naturally about the future of impact investment. So it's really, really interesting. So yes, probably the next questions I would like to ask to you, Kieran, and then to Max. If you, Kieran, could share how from the government, or how the government was able and is able to create these environments, or to enable environments for impact investment. And then to Max, your perspective from the private sector. That could be the next question.
I'd be delighted to. And the main thing I would say is there's an awful lot of things that governments can do. And clearly for each government, it will be different depending on the nature of the economy, the nature of the social and environmental requirements, the nature of investors and social entrepreneurs as well. But I think there are some consistent factors, you might call them tools in the toolkit, that governments can reflect on. I'll run through some of those quite quickly, but the punchline to it really talks about the importance of collaboration with enterprises, collaboration with investors, but I think really importantly in this space, collaboration with those people ultimately who we think impact is for as well. And I think that's often missed from the piece. So what can government do? We learned through our experience on the G8 task force on impact investing that there were three broad roles that governments can play, were playing, and could do more of. So the first was essentially government seeing its role as a platform to create the right context, create the right rules of the road for impact investing. So to give a practical example from the UK, an important part of that work was getting into the legal definition of what fiduciary responsibilities meant. What do those involve or not? And in a way, in the UK, we're in a mad position where institutional investors, say a pension fund, couldn't really believe that the future of the planet was an important thing to care about. I mean, that's bonkers. That's a very, very strange position to be in. So there was important work. And again, that's all moving quite rapidly now, but go back 15 years ago, this, again, kind of familiar territory of being laughed out of the room on some of this. So there's an important role at looking at changing regulations and rules, also doing things about sharing information. Yeah, so you quoted the research that Matt did for the G8 task force some years ago. That was really important in helping other governments, also outside of those G8 countries, understand what was available to them. So there's a role as a platform. There's then a role as a market builder. And I would say that was in three areas that you can really see the role of government. So one is, can you incentivize money into the space? You know, tax reliefs are often a way, or subsidies or things like that. You know, the UK experimented with that. Can you crowd in capital? So a lot of governments have investment arms. We created in the UK something called Big Society Capital. It's independent of government, but it is a wholesale investor in social impact investment funds. It was capitalized with dormant bank accounts. So those were monies that people had left in bank accounts and had untouched for 10 years. And we use that money to essentially seed activity. Big Society Capital was £600 million when we set it up. And now we look at the market in the UK, and we're talking many billions of pounds of investment have flown in. So this cornerstone funding can be very important. And then the final area is really, I would say, government's ability to think of its own role as a participant in impact investment markets. So that's particularly how it buys things. So again, to give an example from the UK, the government here passed something called the Social Value Act. And that said that when government was buying a good or service, it needed to think about the social value of what was being procured. Not just go for the cheapest thing, but say if it was buying a service and the service was delivered by people who previously had maybe been in jail and were ex-offenders, and the enterprise was giving them good quality jobs. Well, there's value being created there, which before government couldn't really, do anything with, but now it could recognize. We also experimented in a lot of countries with the idea of outcomes contracts as well. Government articulating what it would pay for certain social outcomes to try and make it easier for people to say, enterprises to say, look, we can deliver that cheaper than the government can do it. These are all sorts of areas. So we could spend a long time on them, but really just to kind of focus on the fact that government had multiple roles. One, thinking about the rules of the road, one about how can it crowd in capital, and one about how it can buy impact as well. And these are consistent across many countries.
Wow, thank you. Really, really clear with all the examples. And yes, we have now a very clear knowledge and sensation on how the government was able to play and can play in any country. So thank you. And Max, would you, from the private sector, from your perspective, and what could be the changes that you have seen, the trends, and how did the private sector was able to fuel this impact investment field?
Absolutely, Paula. First of all, I'd like to say that the UK is, of course, really a excellent example of a public sector, a government being proactive in creating these enabling conditions for innovation and for collaboration between capital, entrepreneurs, and government agencies, regulators, and so on. That is fantastic. That should be the yardstick, but I dare say that in some countries we have some work to do still. If you look at it now from the private sector, private investor, entrepreneurs perspective, obviously entrepreneurs react to opportunities. And if you look at it in the big scheme of things, what is different? What has been different over the past 15, 20 years? Well, I think it's on the one hand, I mentioned already, our becoming aware that there is this pent-up demand at the base of the pyramid. There are lots of people in developing countries who also, want to access consumer goods. They want products, they want services. Nowadays, everyone basically, for the most part, has access to a mobile phone, for example. That was not the case 10 or 15 years ago. That in itself creates opportunities. That creates opportunities to serve these populations and their demands. And these are often, demands driven also by, pricing models that take out the intermediary. If you live in a slum, for example, unfortunately, you will probably pay a premium on the water that you consume because it's not provided very efficiently, and there will be some intermediaries. So there are entrepreneurs who react to these opportunities and say, how can we serve these populations in ways that are sustainable, reasonably profitable, so that you can, cover the cost of capital. But at the end of the day, you're looking for empowerment. You want to drive empowerment. Secondly, and I think we saw this very well, in at COP26, for example, in Glasgow. I think we have now, and now this has had hit fever pitch, the issue of climate change. But over the past 10 years or so, I think we've gradually become aware that, there is just no substitute for green growth and radical resource efficiency on the one hand, simply because we are already using up our carbon budget, but also because, if more and more middle-class consumers emerge with the consumer patterns that entails normally, it's just not environmentally viable. We will need to transition to a circular economy. We will need to decarbonize. And it's really quite interesting. I was involved in 2013 in the fundraising for an American television series called Years of Living Dangerously, which basically was based on the hypothesis, many Americans, and apologies to American participants today, don't care about climate change. Well, this was 8 years ago, but so we need to make it interesting. What will we do? We'll do basically a documentary series, but we'll put stars as the reporters. Arnold Schwarzenegger was there, Matt Damon, Jessica Alba, and that worked really well. But why I'm raising this point, when I look at the public statements of politicians today, this is very similar to the fundraising videos that we used at the time to raise the funds for the series. Basically New York going under, et cetera, et cetera. It's amazing how this issue has evolved. Again, entrepreneurs create opportunity, and investors want to find good entrepreneurs and support them with capital on the propositions that can return that capital, hopefully with some profit. Point 3, I think, was raised already by Kieran. Another domain which is really driving innovation and emergence of a certain part of the impact investment market is the fact that in OECD countries, for the most part, we have a welfare state, but that welfare state needs innovation for demographic reasons, for reasons of being able to serve heterogeneous populations, for example, because of migration, need to drive social reinsertion. You can't just do that with the instruments at hand. You need innovation, and impact investments, social impact bonds, for example, provide such an opportunity to innovate, to in a sense back new propositions, how to, for example, reintegrate first offenders faster in society by providing them with the right level of support and placement. But of course, investors say, look, if this works, I'm taking a risk. I also want to have some kind of financial profit next to the impact. So these are all, in a sense, fundamental mega trends that are changing how we do business and how we look at innovation. And very interestingly, I think a fourth dimension is driving transformation is, among middle class and upper class consumers increasingly, and I think this is now again hitting fever pitch in a sense, but has been in the making for the past 10 years or so. We want to consume in ways that are sustainable. We want these lifestyles of health and sustainability, and we're willing to pay a premium for that. So, you have propositions where you can say, look, I want to know where I source my coffee. I want to make sure that these growers are being paid fairly, and so on. So, I would say what we've seen over the past 10 years is a tremendous change in terms of awareness of consumers, awareness of governments. What else could be done that drives a more inclusive society, inclusive economy, but also these entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs stepping up with propositions to innovate. And this is really what's driving, what's the driving motor of innovation impact investing. Now, as you know, once you have raised a first round of, say, seed funding, things become really complicated because you need more capital at a later stage if you want to keep, expanding your business, and you're at some point going to deal with probably professional investors. So, friends and family doesn't do the trick anymore. And this is really where I would say only in the past 3-4 years or so, we've seen a change in the financial industry where impact investing, and I'm not speaking about sustainable investing, ESG investing in big companies that give you an ESG report. I'm really speaking about propositions that serve populations that are underserved, that are more complicated, basically, that often involve maybe private equity, businesses in a growth stage, and so on. It is really only now that the financial intermediaries of a certain size are systematically putting these propositions in front of their clients. And this is, in my view, because when we say that these entrepreneurs who are innovators, they want to change the world. Paula, you know a lot about social entrepreneurs like Agustina, because we're working with them, you've worked with them. Well, you see the other side of that coin on the investor side. Investors want purpose. More and more investors are saying, look, of course I want to preserve my wealth and hopefully increase it, but I want to do it in ways that help us get to a better state of being around the world and to a sustainable state. And I think it's a bit like clapping with two hands. Clapping with one hand is a lot of effort, maybe works at the gym level, you might build some muscle, but doesn't make a lot of sound. I think we're now at a stage where essentially you have a critical mass of innovators, of social businesses of different sizes, a critical mass of examples and of thoughtful regulation in some markets, and also of investors. And this is why we're now at a level of momentum where we have to say, we are changing really, we're in a step change. We're changing with the level of action in impact investing currently. And it's exciting to see that you're putting on this conference and discussing this also in a pan-Latin American context, because it's clearly the future. We can't keep allocating capital the way we do, destroying the environment, tearing up societies. We need to do it in a way that makes sense. But I think the good news is this is now possible. I think at some point in the panel we'll also probably discuss the implications of COVID. I don't want to do it now, but I think this, again, the whole COVID pandemic and experience is adding another level of impetus and opportunity to innovate to the field of impact investing. But I'll stop here so that we can move through our conversation.
I have, thank you, Max, really, really interesting. And I'm stopping myself, but I will ask you, why do you think this change has occurred in the past 4 years, and where you see really, really like investors, impact investors really wanting, as you said, to support entrepreneurs to change the world? And also, Kieran, if then you have to, because we have jumped in my next question that was going to be the trends and the future of impact investment. And so, Max, you have just started to say, but then if you go only answer my question, and then I go to Kieran to see what he thinks about the future.
I'll be very brief, but I think there are three fundamental drivers. One is you see, a transition of control of assets in families. And, for the younger generation, it's the proposition to say, look, we're very wealthy, we'll just optimize our taxes. But other than that, okay, maybe do a little bit here and there philanthropically. This formula no longer works, basically, for them from an identity point of view. So there are more and more people who are saying, wait a second, wealth is also power, is responsibility. I could do more. I want to be creative about it. And, again, we have enough evidence that you can try doing that. So I think it's really, in a sense, a younger generation, assuming control. And again, I apologize if this sounds offensive to some of the older participants today in the discussion. But you should see yourselves, if you're now 60, 70 plus, as really forerunners, in your generation, and in fact, in a positive sense, demographics, because it's the future. So that's point one. Point two, I think we've seen just how vulnerable the world has become. Because while it is true that at the micro level and the level of communities, we now have new tools to empower, to bring people back into work and so on, in the big scheme of things, we're unfortunately now completely aware, well, it's good actually, but we are now completely aware of climate change and the implications that are dramatic. Secondly, we are now becoming increasingly aware of the re-emergence of geostrategic rivalry between the great powers. so that, you know, it's no longer obvious that, you know, we'll really move on, be on the right track.
Interesting.
We need to work hard for this, conditions that are changing. And then finally, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of track record in the world of investment. You know, when this movement started, I remember when, you know, Monitor put out the first report estimating the size of the market in 10 years between, you know, 400 million and 1 billion. People say, oh, this is all rubbish, you know. I mean, you know, more conservative people, this is, you know, yeah, you know, a couple of people, okay, they went to Bellagio, they commissioned a consulting firm, you know, that doesn't make any sense. Now, you know, you've seen that actually growth is actually much faster. And people in the financial industry as well at different levels are saying, wait a second, I'm a professional as well who wants to make a difference, who can make a difference. So you have a much broader coalition of people with resources, with money, with skills, talent, passion, who are saying, yes, we want to get the job done. You know, we'll just do it. So you'll find allies in unexpected places who are simply saying, status quo, fine. You know, a lot of things are good. My cat thinks that, you know, thinks I'm speaking too much. But we don't accept the status quo. You know, we're actually serious about improving the state of the world. And maybe at some point later we should discuss a bit about the implications of COVID, but I don't want to do it now because it will be too long otherwise.
Thank you, Max. And Kieran, what would you like to add or to share about your perspective on how is the state of the art now of the impact investment and the future? Kieran, I think you are mute.
Let me build on Max's points because I think he's right. I think he's right about those three drivers, and I think it means that we will see not only growth but accelerated growth in this space. Within that, I think lies a challenge that would be useful, I think, for us to reflect on, which is if we go back to a belief that all capital has an impact, and broadly, you can think about that in three ways. You can think about, you can avoid harm with the capital that you have. You can think about how you're benefiting stakeholders, or you can think about how you're actually contributing to solutions. I think there is a challenge in the growth of this field, the huge amount of money that is coming into it, that people may use the language of one to describe the language of another. We've seen a very, very rapid growth in responsible investing, in ESG investing, often marketed as impact investing. And I would see impact investing as about contributing to solutions in exactly the way that Matt's described it. Now, at one level, this is not a bad thing. You know, money being more attentive to its footprint is good. At another level, though, the big risk, I think, of this moment is what I would call impact integrity. That what happens is that actually a huge amount of capital flows into this space, but the lives of those people who currently suffer the worst outcomes are at the sharp end of all sorts of things. It doesn't improve nearly as much as it ought to. And so I think there's a huge growth in this space, but there's a responsibility for those of us who are acting in it, or those of us who are coming into the space, to think about how do we really make sure that if the intent is to think about how do we build a fairer, how do we build a better society and planet, that's actually what we're doing. And that's what we're doing with full ambition and full intent.
Thank you very much. The impact integrity, and yes, definitely looking forward to that and to that clarity. Thank you both so much for. I think that probably the audience is enjoying as much as I'm enjoying the conversation, and now I would like to ask you to come a bit to Latin America, and which are your perspectives on impact investment in Latin America. I was telling both of you when we started thinking about this panel that probably back when at the times when all this started, I was typically very involved in the growth of impact investment in Latin America. Then I became an entrepreneur, an impact entrepreneur. So I'm very focused in growing my own business, and I can have the vision on how we are raising capital and our challenges. But definitely I don't have like a general vision on impact investment in Latin America. So I really appreciate you sharing. How do you see it different from Europe or no? Or
do you want me to share a couple of views maybe quickly? So first of all, I've had the opportunity to visit quite a few Latin American countries, and I really love your continent. But I think we need to be honest and say that in many countries, there are a lot of fundamental issues where, Kieran, has spoken of I would say, or embodies during his time at the Cabinet Office, a forward-looking, productive government that crowds in, good players, capital to provide solutions. But there are a lot more challenges on that front in general in the Latin American context. And the result of that is that many of the classical public goods that we have come used to in Europe, access to education, access to healthcare, logistics, and training, and so on, even safety, are not necessarily as available. And, I don't want to judge that. It is very complicated, obviously. But that means on the one hand, there is, there's more to do, but you can also look at it differently and say there are a lot more opportunities, to make a difference, because things are not necessarily all worked out. And I think when we look at the future of impact investing in Latin America, I think again, there are three dimensions. One dimension is, of course, at the end of the day, regulation exists, venture, ecosystems exist, fundraising matters. So there are lots of mechanics associated with entrepreneurship and investment. And it's really important to strengthen these ecosystems, because then you can do more, because you don't want your talents all to go elsewhere, essentially. But secondly, it's also driven by fundamental opportunity to venture and to support that financially. And I think if we look in the context of what we've seen now with COVID, I think the four fundamental fields that will probably become more important. One is, I think we've all noticed, what the literature describes as nesting, the tendency that we do want, our immediate environment, our surroundings, to be a place of comfort, of control, of security, is very important. And where this is not the case, think of issues around like social housing, access to furniture, and so on. Those are fields where there is a lot of work to be done, including also in Latin America. Secondly, I think we've seen, the power of digital really during the pandemic. You've seen, basically all digital businesses, be it, food and non-food retailers, or of course data companies, really being extremely successful growing their business. Well, that kind of logic, digitally transmitting services in fields such as education, health, leisure and wellness, of course, as well, for certain populations, those are growth opportunities, and you've seen that, I've seen some ventures in Brazil, for example, where the idea is essentially to say, look, we can't bring a doctor to every urbanization. That's not possible. But, we can create platforms where you can do some of the consultations, on WhatsApp, essentially, and you essentially, deconstruct the value chain so that, you don't, because seeing a doctor is very expensive for the populations that we're targeting here, so that you actually can, use your budget better and get better access to health at the level that you need. Same holds true for education. So lots of opportunities in that space. Another point, of course, and again, this is another, I think, in a sense, implication of more awareness during COVID, is, of course, fields such as logistics, nutrition, healthcare. How can we make sure that those who need it, that I think we all know that, a lot more people, unfortunately, go hungry to bed now, tonight, than they did 3 or 4 years ago, that we've really moved off track on this dimension, the Sustainable Development Goals. well, we need new propositions in that space. And many of these propositions will be driven by impact entrepreneurs and the people who support them. And then finally, and I think this is also an interesting field, but a complicated one, that hasn't really been very much a space for impact investing, but I think something we need to start looking at is, of course, the whole question, okay, digital to deliver goods and services in a more targeted way, and cheaper is fine, but what about the security of all of this? What about cybersecurity and so on? Who makes actually sure that the community services, small scale operations, that they can actually function a proper way? We're seeing this here. I mean, I also teach a course on impact investing in social business in Switzerland, the University St. Gallen, where people put forward propositions on actually creating, in a sense, I guess, almost like data service companies for those, for small scale nonprofits that actually cannot
I think we lost Max.
Yeah, I think he's frozen.
Let's wait on. Until we wait for him. I don't know, Kieran, if you would like to share your vision on Latin America, and also being you so fond of data and so on, how do you see this evolving?
I mean, really, actually, not very much more to add than Matt's. I think the critical point that Matt spoke about is the opportunity. My own take is on the huge amount of social innovation that is occurring in Latin America. How much of it is focused on enterprise models as well, often engaging very different people as well in the design, the delivery of those. So that creates a huge opportunity for capital.
Definitely.
And that is an opportunity that needs to be taken. And I think if there's any insight that Europe or North America can provide, is that this doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of work. It takes bravery. It takes risk. It takes getting some stuff wrong as well. And I think if you look across those continents where the impact economy is emerging in the way that Matt described, I think what you see there is that people are leading.
Yes.
And it's wonderful to have this event and events like these for those leaders to connect with one another and learn and grow and take the field ever further forward.
Great, Kieran. Yes, totally agree with that. It does not happen. It has to. You need institutions, governments, and people to really lead it. So I think that now we are ready. Hi, Max.
Hello, I'm sorry. I have no idea what happened, but my computer crashed. So I guess maybe cybersecurity. That was the term.
We were.
My apologies.
No, really like building with Kieran, building also on your points of the opportunity that we have in Latin America to really build an impact investment environment more solid. The conclusion is that as you said, this doesn't happen organically. You need to really drive it, and so you need the government, you need the private sector, the investors, the entrepreneurs. So totally agree. I think now this was an amazing conversation. I would keep on asking you questions and extracting your knowledge and ideas, but I think that we could open for the audience if someone has a question or in the chat I don't see. Ahora voy a hablar en castellano. Si alguien de la audiencia tiene como alguna pregunta que quiera hacerles a Max o a Kiron y ponerla en el chat, igual si no ya nos queda poquito tiempo. Ahí pueden escribir las preguntas aprovechando. It has, for me at least, and I think for all the audience, it has been a real pleasure, because very concrete insights, and it happens, no? When you have done it, it shows, and so the concrete examples and insights are very relevant. And I definitely, being in Latin America, I definitely wish we could go on the same road, like countries like England, for example. But so, well, we don't have any questions.
And of course, the opportunity, Paula, for anywhere that is perhaps coming not later, but maybe not with the same acceleration, is that of course you can learn that you cannot make the same mistakes, and you can get much further as a result. So perhaps that's our hope for Latin America as well, but it seeds in some way what Europe has achieved.
Definitely, and I can share that, I don't know, Buenos Aires government a couple of years ago started with the impact bonds, and at the beginning that seemed like a crazy idea, and then they worked out. So yeah, and so there are small steps everywhere, and I think we will go there.
I think if I may.
Yes, Max?
Yes, I can unmute myself. Wonderful. Perfect. Computer is back on. Sorry. No, but if I can maybe add to that quickly, I think please use your influence. Think of yourselves as investors. You're allocating capital. When you allocate capital, well, find good entrepreneurs, good businesses that who can work with that capital. But also, you probably not allocate everything. It's probably a core satellite allocation. Work also with your financial intermediaries, raise to them that you are actually serious about this, that you want to see new propositions. And, you probably also have influence politically. There is, Kiran is a fantastic example of that, of actually what government can achieve to build an enabling environment for innovation, for an inclusive society. It's doable, and I think it is doable, but it cannot be done if there isn't a critical mass of people actually making suggestions, asking questions, staying on top of it. So, so use your different levels of influence when you think of yourself as an impact investor. Of course, make investments, but also think about these other elements, these vectors that you can use, because at the end of the day, if we cannot find a way to align what the financial industry does on a day-to-day basis with the long-term, well-being of society, we'll have a very serious problem. And we are all empowered to change this. We can all make contributions from our vantage points, and that this is, of course, why we're all delighted to share. I realize that it's a brutally short panel, and it's only a panel, but give yourself permission to dare, but be strategic and tactical about it, because then you can actually achieve impact yourself with your work and your investments.
Thank you very much, Max. Kiran, some final remarks as well. Would you like?
I think that's a wonderful note that Max finishes us on there. The idea, I think, that is crucial here that we've really been discussing is not investment, but is collaboration. That's, I think, what we're really discussing here. And so it only takes a few people to do that. And as Max has described and has been instrumental over his own career in doing, is things can snowball very, very quickly as well. And we know, given the twin challenges of COVID and climate, there is not a more important time for this sort of collaboration. as well. So it's been a real pleasure to join everyone this afternoon, and it's with great enthusiasm that I see the opportunities ahead.
Great.
Okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
On the side of Alterna, we want to thank you very much for being part of this keynote speech. While Max and Paula know that they're my mentors in my career, and Karen, I haven't worked with you so much, but I admire very much all the work you have done. And it was a real pleasure and an honor to have you three here with a different perspective and a different lens on impact investing in the region. So, well, thank you very, very much. And I hope we can have it again next year in person.
Thank you very much.
Great.
A total pleasure. And Agustina, we admire your tenacity and creativity in putting this on.
Yes, definitely.
Absolute pleasure.
I think I have to apologize for my 1,000 emails, but I must say that
don't apologize.
Are kind of a challenge.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
Paula,
Bye.
Bye. Take care.